Good evening, everybody. It is 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Wednesday afternoon. I guess Wednesday evening. It's May 17th. My name is Max Cohen. I'm the lead writer for the Museum of Crypto Art. This is the Mocha Live podcast. And joining me for the first time in a couple weeks, we're happy to have him back. My guy, my main man, Colborne Bell, founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. What's up, dude? How are you?
I am so happy to be back. I have actually really been missing these. These help me synthesize. These help me digest. These help me get some things into perspective. And I'm really excited about this week's topic.
Yeah, me too. We've had a bevy of wonderful guests, but there's nothing like the two originators of the podcast being back in the saddle. And we do have a whopper of a topic tonight. We're going to talk about ethics and morals, which is something I think we hint on in a lot of podcasts. We talk about it almost as much as we talk about the metaverse. But this is a space that's really kind of odd and still developing. And so there are all these issues of like morals and ethics in terms of how people should act and how people should, I don't know, treat success specifically. So the reason that this topic was on my mind, the reason we're going to go ahead with it is based on Alpha Centauri Kid last week sold 48 one-of-one artworks for like $1.4 million, right? His piano themed piece is called Broken Keys. Really kind of monumental success, and something especially in this like extended bear market, we just haven't seen that much like economic success happen so rapidly, or at least it's few and far between. So it's totally worth celebrating because the works are just, you know, classically this guy and this artist, and we always love to see artists succeed. But I think that there's an interesting question here about how artists, when they achieve a monumental success, should act after making that success or having that success, right? Do artists have a moral or categorical imperative to act a certain way? I'm parodying the words from an anonymous individual who had spoken to me about the artist Pac and how they dropped Merge a couple years ago, which was like, I think it was an open edition, right? An open edition of 3D artworks, but they were bought in such high volume that $91 million total was basically sucked out of the crypto art space to this individual. And from what I understand, there was not a ton of reintegration of those funds back into crypto art. So, you know, I don't think that there's any specific way of jumping into this topic, but this is a difficult space, I think, because of its size, how small it is and how small its principles are, the well-known degeneracy that both travels within it and is just at its edges, the general difficulty of bear markets, the constant claims of, you know, we're all going to make it and how we're all a community and support the artists by influencers, and then the obvious like VC-ish tendencies of a lot of like the economic heavyweights here. But my question, I guess, to start us off is like, do artists have a responsibility to cap their own success, or rather to reinvest their success back in the ecosystem that, you know, allowed them to have that success in the first place? Colborne, what do you think?
Capping success, I don't really want to talk about, right? But I do think in nascent industries, people have a responsibility to reinvest back in the industry, right? It doesn't, you know, if you are like the beneficiary of something, I think how you give back and support others and people within it is really the resiliency of the system. And that's what made it so strong and incredible to begin with, right? And then you saw continued instances of people pulling out, and there was kind of like a mass shift in viewpoints or whatever it was. It just was not a shared similar ethos. And I think that is really why the space is suffering right now. Mm-hmm. Right? Because we're having like two different experiences, and it's not it's not as like, I don't even want to say it was like an egalitarian or it was a fair system before, but it was more interconnected and more interdependent, and people were really looking out for people. Now maybe it's just so big that everybody kind of feels like strangers. So there is more of this like, I don't know you, so I'm just going to take care of myself thing.
Yeah, heard. And I don't, I maybe capping success is the wrong way to put it, but I think you have to really be like untethered from what's happening in this ecosystem to not realize that like the suffering of institutions. I know like Escher XYZ just shut down a couple of days ago or announced they were shutting down. Like things are faltering, right? Like institutions that shouldn't be faltering are faltering, and artists are, even if they're not like leaving the space, they're quite obviously having a difficult time coping. So the
Look, I will say on the like responsibility to cap success, I have never really been of the opinion that like artists should be like protecting supply to ensure value. I have not particularly seen anybody manage an exponential rise very well, and I think the reverse of that, when momentum stalls, is just to kind of step out completely.
Mhm.
So there have been people that have been like incredible catalysts of momentum, but once they hit that escape velocity, well, there's nothing and nobody left to really like keep or protect or ensure that like market value is held. And you know, on the other side of it, we've seen some free falls as well.
Yes, certainly. But I think that even, because I think what happens is when you reach this exit velocity, right, you end up with a career that looks strangely similar to the exact thing that the space was kind of built to challenge, right? You end up in a space that is like rife with middlemen, rife with people trying to like make a buck off of you, right? No artist, I think, wants that, right? All artists want to create at least with some kind of freedom, right? So whether you have reached that exit velocity or whether you are still kind of just coming into the space, getting your feet wet and kind of looking around at all of the various mechanisms that are newly uh, available to you, you're looking for some kind of freedom in your art, right? That's why you enjoy selling your art on a manifold contract without needing a middleman. That's why you enjoy having this money go straight to you so that you can, not be paying 10% to an agent, 10% to a manager, and 10% to a gallerist and being left with so little, right? And that was the whole idea of royalties in the first place, was that money was remaining in the ecosystem even when a high sale might threaten to take some of it out. 10% would go back to the artist who would be able to at least keep it in the ecosystem to either create work or to buy other work. I think about it a lot like, or the way I've been conceptualizing it is like tax dollars, how people rage against high property taxes, but then you explain to them that high property taxes are going to be used to fund like education locally and like maybe a bit further than that. And because you have better education, you'll have better jobs, and you'll have more educated populace, and that'll lead to like less crime and all these other kind of like high yield long-term investment results. And so the
Mhm.
benefits of taking that money and trickling it around the ecosystem is that the entire ecosystem is uplifted, and so are you, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I want to go back and say, like, are you really independent when A16 is the one that is like the seed money in that manifold contract, right?
mm,
What does it mean when like VC money is intermingled with sovereignty, right? And they're the ones who might be kind of like guiding and directing where this goes. Like, is that independence? Not really. It's a certainly useful tool step in like or toolkit in stepping away from the idea that everything needs to be like concentrated in a marketplace and that the artist can be its own storefront. But I don't want to like say that is the end goal of independence.
well, but I think that like that's an important point, right? I guess I think you and I are well noted as being quite reflective on like the downstream effects of some of these decisions that perhaps other people aren't reflecting on. But when if you're VC backed, and let's say you have a large sale that is backed by a VC, you're not you're not achieving anything, right? You are basically, you're looking at short-term success and not reinvesting back into the mechanisms that might allow you to achieve more longer term success, right? The people who are the most successful in this space, bar none, are the people with the best connections, right? Not the best connections to collectors, but the people who have, like, the highest quality relationships, friendships, the artists. I think that's why we always talk about artists who have been here for a while, who are constantly able to sell work, because it's oftentimes selling work to other artists who they have really good relationships with. As I've spoken to all these collectors over the course of many weeks, one thing that keeps coming up is that how important the personal relationships are between artists and collectors. Collectors do have favorites, but not necessarily in the line of VCs who are just looking to make a buck, but in terms of people who the collectors really just really vibe with, really want to see achieve some kind of success, really want to see stick around for some, moment where perhaps everything's a little bit easier.
I mean, that was the signal of the artistry, right? Is that me having no idea like what uh digital techniques are being used, what digital mastery looks like, right? Like who are the artists that I like, what are they buying, and who are they buying it from, right? When the market became the signal as to what everybody was buying, then suddenly everything was lost because it just became a game about pouring the most capital in, right? So these things are self-fulfilling until they're kind of not, right? Until somebody like comes along and questions like, why was this much money paid for this, right? Why was, like, for example, Three Arrows Capital taking a risk on this? What does it mean when, who was the other guy, like Kevin Rose, when Kevin Rose got hacked and then suddenly has to liquidate everything? Like, what is this? How are they picking winners, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I don't know. That was always very strange to me, is that a lot of the like original people who would put in the time and built their own like market and built their own collectors, there was this second wave and they just got like totally overlooked. And there was like a totally separate market built here that had nothing to do with like what was organic and natural and had been occurring for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, before I ask like or go on another whole spiel, I'm curious, like, what do you think are the mechanisms that have allowed artists to even like reach the exit velocity that we were talking about earlier, right? Like that success was built on the back of something. What do you think it was built on the back of?
I think it's largely about orchestration and like building your community before you like kind of share and release the work.
Yeah, of course.
Right. I am confounded daily by the things generally that like go viral, right? By the projects that go viral. This is all very confusing to me. So I and I'm sure a lot of people agree that like money might be like the determinant of the art in the now, right? But I don't think a lot of the time that art in the now is the art that persists,
Definitely.
right? So, when we talk about like limiting your, what did you say? Potential capping the, like,
But that was like, I think that was a mismanagement of verbiage, so to speak.
but I mean, I think it's an interesting question because either you are searching for escape velocity and you want your 15 minutes of fame, knowing that there really is nowhere to go. We've talked about before, when the peak is Sotheby's and Christie's. Well, that is like nowhere that any traditional artist would ever want to be,
Yeah, people
right?
go there because they have to, right? No artists want to sell with these mechanisms, but out in the world, from what I understand, you really don't have many options, but auction houses, but gallerists, but middlemen, but like white glove services. Like
Right. But it
you have to.
almost feels like, to enter the art world, that you need a sale there, right? You need something to validate. And I cannot tell if this is all the same, like strategic implementation to like catch the eyes of potential future art collectors and say, here is a data point that pertains to this person. And now you can go back because like what is transparent and on chain doesn't actually really matter. So it's like, do you want to commit to a like lifetime of sustainability and creativity, or do you want those 15 minutes and you want to hit that escape velocity knowing that there is no there is no
Yeah,
end to this?
I was talking to maybe talking is not the right word. I was arguing with my father the other day. He was making a point because we were talking about crypto regulation. I was talking about, I don't know what's going to happen in the upcoming US presidential elections. It seems like it's a pretty scary time for just crypto in general as like the object of regulatory scrutiny. And he was saying, well, let's say all the blockchains were to just like, let's say they were to vanish, right? Well, digital artists would be able to sell their art elsewhere. And I said, like, yes, in theory, but of course not, because what we have here, the grand mechanism is this community of people who want to look at, buy, sell art, create marketplaces and mechanisms for buying and selling art and sharing art, all of these things that exist in this organic community, right? And all of this success, right? Even if you are going to end up with this exit velocity at a Christie's or Sotheby's, even if you're going to achieve that monumental success the way, say, like Beeple has, and kind of like leave the space, you're still building that on the backs of the people who are in the know earlier, right? So, like, again, I don't want to. I know nothing about the finances of any given person, right? But like Alpha Centauri kid making $1.4 million, I have no idea where that money came from, whether it was organic or whether it wasn't. But like that person has been building within this community. That person has been, active within this community for quite a while, and would not have been able to achieve that success without the community at least propping them up. And someone like Beeple, who achieves a $69 million sale and totally leaves the stratosphere, still needs people to pay attention at first. And where do they pay attention? They pay attention within this like quagmire of interest that has been kind of fomented in crypto art, right? So that community itself is the mechanism by which people are, being propelled upwards. Whether they leave the community afterwards or not is almost besides the point, because it's the community itself that got them to that point. And so I would think that you have a responsibility to keep that community going, because you owe your success to them. At least like mention them in the, award speech. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of things that could be said. This is not a very, it's not a space that's filled with like a lot of gratitude, right? And it's not really anymore a space that's filled with a lot of kinship. And, maybe this, I can still go to like places and like be with Dada, for example, right? And that is about that, right? But there was a market shift, and I don't think that, and now we exist in like these two parallel worlds where there's an incredibly loving community of supportive people that want to promote the artistry and like care for one another, and this idea that there are new and novel ways of like commerce and exchange and economics and support, and this is like the powerful thing that crypto is doing. And then there's also like a very dark, self-serving, like post-capitalist launchpad. I think I think like what happened with Ben.eth is a very good example. I think like kind of what happens with meme coins is a very good example. Like Rhett doing whatever Turbo Toad is, that's like an incredibly genuine artist that, was in an experiment, and, suddenly it goes viral, and then perhaps maybe you're like in way over your head, and suddenly like the project that was a joke is no end. That's kind of also the, the story of the museum, right? Is like, how is something that is like supposed to be a joke elevated and lifted, right? This idea of crypto art, this idea of digital art, NFTs and the blockchain, something that is just like derided. Suddenly it flips the power structure, and then like all the attention is there only for it to like, and will it recover? Nobody knows. Here we are kind of on the other side, very deep. And who is going to like lead us out? What will stick? What will change?
I think we need like, I think that these changes come from the top, right? And by top, I mean very clearly like the high earners of this community, right? I think it is imperative, and maybe my point is just as simply that it's imperative that the people who are succeeding within this community are keeping the community like alive.
I mean, if
right?
they care, maybe they just don't care.
But I guess my question is, how can, and maybe this is the exact point of the moral and ethic, like how do you not have an ethical responsibility to care about the thing from whence you got your start in the first place? Otherwise, like it's too callous for me to believe, especially from artists who are, by the nature of the work they do, reflective and self-analytical and aware of their surroundings and deeply embedded in context, right? I don't think that, I think you have to consciously turn away from that if you're going to turn away from it. Because I think at a certain point, it's like, even if you're grifting people, right? You get this kind of Stockholm syndrome, right? It's like undercover cops, embedded in like drug sting rings, will become really attached to the people who they're undercovering upon. Like, how can that not inflect you, right? These relationships that you're going to naturally make, even if you're in it for totally your own gain. And again, I don't really have specific examples. You brought up Beeple when we were talking before the show. I'm curious what your thoughts on how Beeple kind of handled his success are.
I don't
Well,
know, man.
that was
Yeah.
a pregnant inhale.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have much of a comment there. Like it wouldn't have been how I would have done it, but I don't know. Maybe, I don't think there was much agenda there. I think it was kind of, again, I think it was kind of a joke gone bad, right? And people like kind of took it too far because
Mhm.
there were a lot of things promised that might not have been delivered. There was a lot of like weird associations made, a lot of like, attachment to the thing. And, then the question becomes like, is and was it ever art? What is it? Performance art? Is like anything actually real and substantive?
On a
Um,
practical level, though, Beeple made a shitload of money and then stopped minting, right? And
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
there was supposed to be like a continual seasons on Nifty Gateway, right? Like that these things would be released. And then, I would imagine somebody got in, their ear and said, hey, like, this is probably not a good idea. You can't like sell something for whatever, $69 million, and another thing for $30 million. And then there's not really demand that's going to continue to support
but I think
buying.
this is what I mean by like capping success, right? Or at least being like aware of one's success, right? People make $70 million on an artwork. And if he were to release an artwork a month, one artwork a year, right? Or any kind of edition, anything, it would take all the attention. It would take a ton of liquidity, right? It would all veer into the giant whirlpool that is Beeple. But there's really no way outside of buying on secondary that I am aware of to support that artist or to get a piece of that artist at this point, right? That itself is a kind of practical choice, right? If he just wants endless money, he can have endless money.
No, but I mean, even you saw demand soften so quickly. It was like, I think whatever the Christie's Maps auction, like,
Mm.
different. There was just, I don't know. It's these things are about like moments in time. Um,
Let me ask you another question. I'm curious about your opinion on. Um, I think the nature of how we actually like buy and sell this artwork is pretty singular by nature. Right? You have a public auction for an artwork by one artist. Like, people bid on it. Each bid gets kind of blown out, which is, I think, important and necessary for the marketing of the piece. But like, this is the only way we have is like, here's an artwork, everybody buys it, and it goes to one person, and then that's the end of things. I'm wondering if there are any other models of creating, buying, selling artwork that you're aware of that might say like allow big name artists to not inherently sap liquidity from the space, like maybe some kind of more egalitarian marketplace model,
look,
instead of something that is essentially hyper capitalist.
I mean, look, I think Beeple was right to like list those original pieces at $1.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the whole point is now that we don't have to depend on the secondary markets,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there is a carry on effect of like social capital and people moving these things and people talking about these things. And hey, like, I just made $300 in like 20 minutes of holding this thing. Like, that carries its own momentum. And I think the innovation here is not in the ability to like sell one of one art on the internet, but on the effect that like digital distribution can have. Um, and I think like if this is really going to touch, Nifty Gateway wants 1 billion people, right? If this is really going to touch 1 billion people's lives, well, it's not going to be on Ethereum, right? And the people who are going to become masters of the space are going to be the people that actually embrace like abundance and distribution, right? How
Mm-hmm.
do you get all of your work, all of this work that you create into the hands of as many people as possible? Like, how do you become a global, like rock stars were? That was always the thing, is that the crypto artists are going to become rock stars because these are rails of distribution.
But do you think that's even possible with like visual art itself? The nature of a visual art asset is that it is rare, right? It's not like, I think it's so much easier for.
I disagree. I disagree. I think we're
Yeah.
moving away from this idea of scarcity in art into the idea that art can be abundant and enjoyed, right? This is literally like tearing down the walls to let more people in and to have access. So like, what is the best way to let people have access? Well, that is to like freely and abundantly share, but it's
Mhm.
not a like. It's not like a like or a retweet of caring about something. It's actually like owning a token that is associated with that, right? So the people that can encourage 10,000, 100,000 people to get into like the long tail of their success, that's the distribution. That's what excites me. This isn't really about like selling one of one pieces, because then you end up with a group of like 40 collectors, and it
Yeah.
gets stale, right? When
Well, who's
these things,
who's come closest to that model, right? Who do you think is like an exemplar of having that long tail of success?
I don't know. I mean, I think Fuck Render was pretty innovative in the beginning with like that,
Yeah.
right? The avatars and the additions, and like distribute.
Hmm.
Um, I've been out of the market for a while, so it's like it's hard to say. I don't find it particularly enjoyable or as interesting as I once did.
Sure.
I think it's kind of a broken model, and I'm glad to have been there to help like bootstrap it. But it's not the end goal, and I don't see enough people building like interesting, powerful tools that are actually like leveraging the technology or have any sort of like forward vision for what this can mean for artists.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, like, what are you? Can you identify like a thing or two that is lacking, right? That you have identified that you want to change, or you want
I
to.
just think everything falls into like a web 2.1 and not a web 3.0, right?
Okay.
So everything that is getting like bootstraps, like the whole idea was that we could have some sort of exponential thinking and advancement around the way we're like interacting and engaging with each other online, right? And that we're moving into these visual languages that can be held and distributed, and more importantly, like speak to philosophies. But as we quickly found out, Ethereum is incredibly expensive. I think the artifacts that have been minted on Ethereum become incredibly scarce as like the whole crypto thing happens. um because in just curating and managing and it's expensive,
Sure.
and it's a lot of time. It's not like particularly the simplest UI UX to begin to move all these things around. So, but I don't, I'm much more interested in the artists that are preparing for whatever comes next than the artists that are kind of like capturing the here and now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think that's why like I feel such an affinity for like Untitled XYZ and like Peen Poon and 6 and 5 and these other like metaverse architects, because there's the guys building Hyperfi, because there's no demand for that, or very little demand for that right now. But there's such conviction from these artists who are building a bevy of artworks in a way that is innovative for a future that is A, not guaranteed, and B, like far from being here. I think maybe that's what so attracts me about the metaverse, is that it had its moment in the sun. It's been given up upon, just because it's been given up upon in as like a pop cultural artifact, or as like a moneymaker today. Meta, whatever, Facebook changed its stock ticker back, doesn't mean that the reasons for that technology existing don't become even more necessary in the future, right? But I keep thinking that this is circling around the original point, which is, does this space not have a responsibility to keep the space alive, right? Because these advancements are theoretically coming at some point, right? Like, the blockchain does not go away. If MetaMask isn't going to create an intuitive user experience, somebody else will eventually. There are better wallets on Solana, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a Solana maxi. There are really unique and intuitive wallets. Whether it's there's a wallet called Backpack, um, made by a company called Coral, and it has applications within the wallet itself. It's really innovative. You can access videos and like claims and mints from within the wallet itself, and it's like, that is just one step up from MetaMask, and we've seen none of that innovation from that company itself. All these collectors I speak to are constantly saying that the display isn't there, right? From the price isn't there. if you're going to buy a token frame, it doesn't have the right aspect ratio. We're failing in that sector, right? And we're failing in the wallet sector because these wallets just don't make much sense, and the onboarding process doesn't make much sense. And we're failing like across the board in terms of the actual technology that is needed to get people to care about this stuff. And I think we are going to be shocked unnecessarily when some big actor, whether it's a Google, an Apple, or somebody we can't predict right now, is going to come in with really user-friendly and sleek versions of all these things we have that are way, way, way more approachable.
I mean, I wish they would, but they're not going to, right? Because they have their own, everybody has their closed in walled garden, right? And people keep paying, and there's like subscription fees that just get eaten up every month. And, these things are like Apple is just sitting on hordes of cash, right? No actual innovation is coming from these companies. And it's actually scary to me how few builders there are in this space, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me that like some of the best devs along the way that I've met don't want to like build product anymore. They want to work with artists to build like out these artistic concepts. So, the art is incredibly good and incredibly interesting, but if there is no mechanic to like, get it out or ensure its longevity or ensure that people are building like necessary infrastructure tools, because it's not sexy, because it is incredibly difficult to like build, like that's where we get this terrible reversion into like the degeneracy of meme coins and like what is the lowest common denominator. Well, like let's make it as cheap as possible and mint it as an open edition, and like this is and then that behavior just encourages more. I cannot tell you how many people ask me like, do I need to do an open edition, when that was all the rage. So it sadly has become like well,
let me ask you this.
A race to the bottom.
Does a space like crypto art need to have artwork that sells to be at the best version of itself? And the reason I ask that is because I have a very, I think, unique position on crypto art, because I'm a writer and I write all sorts of things that nobody sees. That is never going to sell, right? I've said it on this podcast before. I'll say it again. I send a million short stories to the New Yorker, to the Atlantic, things I write that just like end up on the hard drive of my computer, right? It's work that I have no real hope of selling, right? And I'm not sure that ethos exists in crypto art. I think, we've talked before about how like everything gets minted, right? There's just an over minting problem. And that's going to lead to a problem of oversaturation just in terms of how many products there are, like physical assets that one could buy. Not every artwork needs to be minted. I was talking about this with Earth Sample the other day on the pod, how when Earth Sample uses like AI in some works, like sometimes he posts them, sometimes he doesn't even go that far. And Curran 4D, we've talked with him about how he has a very strict code of what is worth his your background. Natural synthetics is Curran 4D. A very strict metrics for what is going to be minted and what is just going to either languish away on his computer or be posted on Twitter. I know like Claire Silver does the same thing, and a lot of these AI artists who are just kind of experimenting with various mechanisms, various like new stable diffusion models, will just post pictures of stuff that they've created and not necessarily mint it. I have a couple questions on this topic, but like, was this, and the reason I'm interested in this is because so many of these collectors I've spoken to recently have talked about how there was no expectation for a long time that anybody would actually make money here. So when did that happen? When did it happen that it was not just not just a possibility that people would make money here, but that it was an expectation that you would make money?
I mean, go look at all the headlines after the Beeple sale, right? This was like the gold rush. This was when like everybody was flooding in, doing everything they could. And then it became a competition, right? Because the collectors were few and the dollars were few. And then it just became like, take out as much as you can. Like people's lives were changed for sure. Like greatest wealth transfer to the creative class in history. But like the longer the euphoria, the greater the come down. And we're going to have to build it like back up from scratch. And a lot of the things that, were valuable at that time are never going to trade again. And people just aren't going to care because it's frankly, it's like, for the most part, it's not very interesting.
Yeah, hey, listen, I'm not Mr. Doom and Gloom. There's such an emphasis on selling artworks, right, and making money for artworks, and such a from it looks
Because
like
that's
when
what moves algorithms. That's what like underlies everything, you know? That's what makes people feel important, right? That's like what we've been told makes art good, right? And you know, the contemporary art world has come so far along in this journey that like everything is orchestrated in an artist's career. Like how much of an organic uplift around art is there in the art world today? I don't think there is any, right? From the people that I've talked to, it just doesn't exist, right? So I have seen like organic rises of people and artists, and but there is an inherent volatility that makes like the exclusive selling of things to random strangers on the internet with that have the ability to do whatever they want with it at any time extremely unpredictable, and it doesn't necessarily like align interests all the time,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
So the
yeah.
best piece of advice is really to just like begin to know your collectors, and of course that's like really really difficult. um
But let's transcend like collectors for a second, right? Like I think for a lot of people like myself who I don't collect very much artwork, my experience with crypto art is the art that I get to see on a daily basis. I am just being exposed to so much art, right?
yeah,
Whether I'm purchasing it or not, I am just seeing it. And there's just no other place in the world where that's happening, right? It's not happening out into the world where it's just advertisements. It's not happening, on TV where it's just advertisements. It's not happening in any other place where I'm being exposed to information, right? Only in this little crypto art Twitter space or these crypto art spheres and discords and things am I actually being exposed to artistry, right? We can talk about whether that's actually enriching, whether what that does to the psyche to just be buffeted with art every day. Whenever I open my Twitter app, which is a lot because I'm a fucking addict, there's just art in front of me. And that itself is kind of a revolution, whether it's being bought, whether it's being sold or not. And I think that that is the common denominator for a lot of people. That if you like dig down into the ethos of artists, they're really just psyched that their work is being seen. And if you dig down into the ethos of a lot of collectors, like Ann Spalter told me, like it's just fun to collect crypto art, right? It's just fun to be here. It's fun to see all of this innovation. It's fun to see like Pepe memes that are referencing world events. Like you're just able to see minds splooshed out onto, you know, a platform where you are able to view them.
yeah, yeah,
And
it
and,
is. I
and
mean, there's nowhere else quite like it, right? I can't imagine a sphere sector, anything that is more interesting, more visually stimulating, more like mentally compelling. It's not like, you know, the 6 o'clock news,
mhm.
right? It's its own drama with many sub dramas. You can follow what you want. You can, you know, and it's all happening in real time. This is like great big experiment. But I
It's a
think,
revolutionary aesthetic experience just on its own.
yeah, it is. It is pretty like transcended, and it is like making great distances among people feel much flatter, and it's facilitating all sorts of wild conversations, and you know, but and the way the art like is energetically being transmuted and shared, and people are coming back and like connecting, and real life is like changing, is just incredible.
Yeah, it truly is. And so and I think that like artists, no matter what outcomes they eventually get, I can't imagine that many people are coming into crypto art and thinking that it will really be the channel to magnificent success. Maybe it'll be the channel to some success, or maybe they're here by necessity because there is nowhere else to go. But I think you have to kind of have to be delusional. Yeah, at any stage of the game, you have to be delusional to think that your art is going to transcend everything else. And I'm not saying that because of the quality of any specific artist, but if anybody who creates art, me, you, any of these artists, filmmakers, screenwriters, musicians, if anybody actually thinks that that they have a good chance of transcending the noise, right? Like that's not what this is about. If you get that break, if you get lucky and you do transcend, wonderful. But I don't know if anybody can actually, or I don't get how people can delude themselves into really thinking that it's going to happen for them, the strength of their work aside. Now, that just being the preface to, I would have to think that most people who emerge from the, the herd of crypto artists to become some kind of name, some kind of VC backed darling. Like they got here for the right reasons. They entered in here for the right reasons, which maybe was that aesthetic explosion, which maybe was that community. Why would you not feel it as a responsibility to keep that going when the alternatives are all shitty, especially?
Yeah, because it doesn't, I would imagine because it doesn't feel organic to you, right? Because it actually wasn't organic. It was incredibly orchestrated. I don't think much of like the market value is a determinant of like the quality of the work, right? And that is always the big knock on this space, is that it's like screensaver art, and you know, and so there's valid arguments as to why we are not like conveying and connecting and pushing out further out of this bubble, because in all of its transparency there is something about it that doesn't sit right, and it hasn't sat right for a while, and it makes people mad and it makes people frustrated, and it's, you know, incredible soap opera to watch. But when you begin to like attach like value to this, it kind of takes away from the art itself.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yet we do have, despite the social disdain and despite the like the difficulties of existing in this space as a whole, we do have these individuals who emerge from the quagmire, who do achieve something that is bordering on mainstream success. And so I keep coming back to this point, but like, how do you not have a responsibility, or how do you not feel compelled to then embrace this place that bore you, that, like you said, like the rest of the world, a lot of it kind of thinks is a joke, making screensaver art, and I don't know, fuddling around with like Pepe the Frog.
You know, I think sociopaths do well online.
Perhaps. And maybe it's something about artists. Maybe, like, you know, you have to be single-minded to make it as an artist.
Yeah, you didn't have to before. I don't know. You know, maybe you do. Maybe the rules of engagement have changed. You know, maybe I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess there's another interesting, I think, way of framing this, which is like, if a single crypto artist survives, you know, what happens to crypto art? Does crypto art exist in the like liminal spaces between artists? I think we've thought about this with Twitter before, right? Like if Twitter goes away and suddenly a communication mechanism between artists goes away, what happens to crypto art? It just becomes an ethos without a home.
I mean, I think that, you know, I think people have thought the same about Bitcoin, right? What happens if the US government bans Bitcoin? Well, then like Bitcoin actually only becomes stronger. You know, so I think in all places, all spaces, all like, it's art, you know, people always remember and talk about like art and culture. So, you know, I don't know.
Well,
I have my own, yeah.
Well, you have your own what?
I mean, you know, for me, there's digital art and there's crypto art, right? And crypto art rises with crypto, you know, and if crypto is on kind of this inevitable path to kind of like, if blockchain is a technology that is going to become as big and as pervasive as the internet, which like in my mind, of course, like undoubtedly, right? There has to be a cultural element and component, and the people that like embrace and support and uplift that are going to, but like all of this is only as powerful as the network itself, right? So if you are an individual trying to make a network around you, then you better be putting in like strong, resilient nodes that are going to be alongside you.
Well, this is that point is why, like, I kind of rail against this whole like fucking blue sky thing that everyone had their moment with. It's like the network is what's important, but how can you have a network that is also like, do we want a network that's exclusive? Like, how is that helpful to what we're trying to do here? It's a status symbol, but the whole point, like, we're trying to get rid of these status symbols and we're trying to exist in this liminal space where the art is uplifted. And every time there's some like new alternative, it requires you to either have some kind of technical competence, it requires you to have, you know, the vetting of another member. It's like, awesome, there's less people here, and they're of a more specific breed just by nature, right? Because they're going to be friends of friends of friends of whoever the original is.
But it's
I
like
don't.
it's like you said, artists want their artwork to be seen. People want to like feel, connect, and recognize one another, you know. And I think there is a I'm going to speak from the American experience. There's a continued like distrust in your neighbor. There is a continued like other against the other in this country, and like the safer, resilient places are the places that people find online, right? And it leads to, you know, sometimes weird communities that form, but at the end of the day, these are people with like similar problems and angst aggregating in like communal places together. And you know, I think people are becoming at the end of the day like either more generally more niche and more interesting and more like connected with access to information, and they want to pursue the things that they want to pursue. And I still think art and culture is kind of like one of those highest ultimate pursuits that people aspire to.
I totally agree, and maybe the quote unquote answer is just as simple as finding an equal reason to celebrate that people are seeing your art versus people purchasing your art, right? So something I've said for ages is that the great innovation of crypto art, it seems to me, is in creating like a financial middle class for artists between superstardom and starving artists. Maybe that's just something that cannot happen in perpetuity, right? But there is so much like I don't know, and maybe it just changes with like actual world economics, right? This is a bad moment for economics everywhere.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
putting money in a illiquid asset, which itself is a derivative of a volatile asset in a market which is super uncertain. You know, if people freak out about like the strength of the US dollar, and when that's happening, everything's going to tighten. I can't imagine people in the traditional art world are doing a lot better. I can't imagine there's a lot of,
yeah.
art investment in general because it's not where you put your money when things get scary.
I mean, I'm going to tell you, like, one of the smartest financial minds that I know called me last week, and he's like, we need to like tokenize the museum's collection so people could buy like an equity percentage in this because crypto art is like the ultimate store of value. I'm like, man, you are like way out there. First of all, we could never do this, but actually, like, you are right. You are right, you know, because everything is like funny money make believe, right? And that was kind of, I think, the basis for this whole thing exploding, is that there need to be alternative forms of value and like money and organization considered. And you know, it wasn't ICOs because there was no true substance there. But at the end of the day, somebody producing art is valuable, right? The problem is it's about longevity and not like immediacy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Mm.
you know, there was art there that kind of like sat for a while, but there is a wide gulf between somebody like, you know, an X copy and a pack and kind of like some of the original like darlings of this space. You know,
Yeah.
like I'll say like Trevor Jones, to his credit, still here, still creating, still like engaging. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we can go kind of like one by one to
Giving away open edition or free editions of an artwork.
yeah, yeah. I saw that. That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
which
distribution. That is
yeah,
literally distribution,
and
you
I
know?
think that's
Like,
what I'm talking about, right? It's like
yeah.
Trevor Jones has made a crap ton of money here, has a crap ton of influence within this space, right? Like the idea of minting something for free and just saying, "Here, have my art," is kind of wonderful and kind of the whole like ethical foundation that I want to see built, right? That like success is seen as a thing that can be attained, right? And it's not just American, but I think it is exemplified by the American ideal that nothing is ever enough. Your success is just what you can see in front of you, and as soon as you attain it, well, you can see a new kind of success. So you always have to keep rushing after it.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it
and I
shows,
think, yeah,
well, when people don't reinvest, it shows a lack of faith,
yeah,
right? It shows they don't really believe in themselves. They don't really believe in the system, right? That maybe they just like played the game right, and that they might be like smarter than everybody else in that moment because they were able to like take this. And I kind of feel that this is like the 2023 version of capitalism, in which everything is an addiction economy, right? In which systems like globally appear to be failing, in which like inflation is running rampant, in which like every little thing you're kind of taxed on and picked apart, and it just feels like everything is at war with itself right now.
Which makes it so much more important that there is a place to see art, because regardless of
Yes.
what you feel about the world, like there is a panacea quality to just seeing something as simple as the form of expression that somebody makes. It's why people escape into movies. It's why people escape into
Totally.
books. It's why you and I can escape into Twitter, even though Twitter is a nightmare, conglomerate of horrible politics and all sorts of like foul suffering, and find within it this like little cocoon of safety that's just covered in glitchy stuff and surreal stuff and colorful stuff and sad stuff and emotional stuff and all of this art, right? And it feels important to preserve that, because it is to an extent like sanity. And I don't know who wouldn't want to see that, who wouldn't want to have more art in their lives, just as a baseline. Nobody is ever upset when they see more beautiful things, and that's what crypto art provides. So why not reinvest
crypto
back in
art was the point, right? Crypto art, something that challenges the orthodoxy, right? That's why Xcopy was so successful, right? Because it was painting pictures of this world in like the reverse, right? Like the what is like the end goal of the news or any of this, right? It's not about pretty pictures. It's about things that challenge conceptions and viewpoints and get people to reconsider the possibilities of the architecture and the framework, right? So like, yes, the art is a place for people to escape, but at the same time, it should be having some effect, right? And it doesn't necessarily need to be like a radicalizing effect, as like crypto people are ostracized and painted, but it needs to help challenge and take people into the idea that like the system is broken and it's not working for everybody, and there has to be a new way of building like networks of value, digital value on the internet, and sharing expression.
Maybe it's anonymity, man. Maybe it's like platforms for buying and selling artwork where you can't know the name of the artist and the artist can't know the name of the buyer, and so you're forced into some kind of anonymity.
People have tried that.
Of course,
All sorts of like mystery boxes, anything that ups the gambling element is.
No, not upping the gambling. I mean, I guess it would naturally become upping the gambling, but I don't know, something that centers the aesthetics. Anyways, we'll keep farting around this topic for the rest of our natural born lives, I assume.
Undoubtedly.
All right, so now to the topic that everybody wants to know about. So there's 4 basketball teams left. My Celtics begin the Eastern Conference Finals game against the Heat tonight. Your Lakers suffered a devastating loss to the hands of the Nuggets of Denver last night. Coborn, are you paying any attention? Do you care? How are you feeling? If so, if not?
I watched the last half of the game, and the Lakers were great.
Because you do have to start at this point. You have to start caring. There's just not that many.
Yeah. I'm into it. That's a good team. Lakers are,
because you realize that we're like this close to seeing Celtics versus Lakers in the playoffs, and if that happens, we're doing a whole basketball episode.
I don't know anything about the Heat. I didn't know they were actually any good. They're not good.
They suck. They're playing amazing. They're playing way better than they should, but they suck.
They've still got Jimmy Butler kicking around.
I'm gonna have to go back and edit this podcast when the Heat inevitably beat the Celtics.
Right.
Take that out so the receipts are gone. But if you're listening,
how did Miami get here? They were the 8th seed, huh?
Yeah, they're the first play-in tournament team, or I guess one of the first play-in tournaments teams, along with the Lakers, to make the NBA semifinals, and also I think one of like 2 or 3 8 seeds since like the 80s to do so. It's pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, I had no doubt about the Lakers. I know how like LeBron and AD turn up, and they
never doubted for a second.
They filled the gaps nicely.
All right, we're gonna have more basketball takes next week. I'm gonna either be just jubilant or
we'll see you. We'll see you in the finals, man.
I would love that.
The Nuggets got lucky last night.
I don't know, man. They're pretty good, but yeah, nothing would be better than a Lakers Celtics finals, and we could actually yell at each other about basketball for like 50 minutes instead of a minute and a half at the end here. Coburn, anything you want to leave the people with before we get out of here?
Nah, a lot of love, and if you made a lot of money, you better buy crypto art.
Yeah, buy crypto art or invest in crypto art things,
or go build something.
Yeah, or build something.
Preferably not a marketplace, maybe a tool for artists.
You can't take the money with you,
Right. Right.
but you can build things that will outlive you.
Go build a meme coin.
Go build a meme coin and tell us first. This has been another episode of Mocha Live with Max and Colborn. It's been a joy being here with all of you, and we'll see you next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. Say bye to the people, Colborn.
Bye, people.